Modi. Adit Modi is an AWS solutions architect at Lauren. He has over a decade of hands-on experience in cloud and DevOps. He holds 11 AWS certifications and specializes in AWS-related DevOps, data engineering, and infrastructure as code. As an AWS ambassador and HashiCorp ambassador, Adit is a passionate advocate for community-driven growth, actively contributing to the tech community. And today, his topic is on mastering multi-account management with AWS Control Tower and landing zones. Please help me in welcoming Adit Modi.
Hi everyone, am I audible? You can hear me, right? Good, good. Okay, so good afternoon everyone. I hope you have had a lunch and a good session, right? So excited for the talk, looking forward to it. How is it? Good? No? You want to go home? No? Cool, no worries. So the session that I have for today is around mastering multi-account management with AWS Control Tower and Landing Zone. So this session is specifically for people who are managing multiple accounts and who see a pain point of how do you automate the process of managing multiple AWS accounts, and how do you have all of the best practices integrated when it comes to a multi-account setup. So that is going to be the focus for this session, right? So we'll start with a very important question. How many of you are managing more than one AWS account today? Raise of hands. A lot of us, right? So a lot of people are managing multiple AWS accounts as of now, right? So there is a constant challenge when it comes to managing multiple AWS accounts. And in this particular session, we'll discuss on the challenges as well as the solution for the challenges, right? Okay, so the agenda for today is an introduction to multi-account management, right? So I'll first, we'll discuss why a multi-account management is an important part of you, right? So why multi-account is essential as a best practice for organizations. Then we'll understand foundations of AWS Control Tower and Landing Zone. So what is an AWS organization? What is an AWS Control Tower? And why do you need a landing zone? So we'll discuss that. And then we'll also understand some of the centralized identity and security management tools that are built in or part of Control Tower. Whenever you set up a Control Tower, these things are built in or part of it. So we'll understand what those are. So for centralized identity, we'll see security hub. For centralized identity, we'll see IAM Identity Center. And for security management, we'll see security hub. But we'll understand why they are needed and what benefit you get out of using them, right? And then I'll share a demo. The demo is basically of using a control tower setup, and then what are the different security hub, identity center, how are we using them, how it is managed, right? So I'll show you that. And finally, I have a list of best practices or list of things that we need to follow as AWS best practices for managing multiple accounts. So we'll discuss that, and I'll share with you, so you can take that away as part of the session. So introduction to multi-account management, right? So why a multi-account strategy is essential, right? So let's first understand why you need a multi-account strategy, right? So think of a use case where you have multiple workloads, right? I have my dev, stage, production, those three different type of workloads, right? So I want to keep these workloads separate, right? So in a way, reduce the risk and also improve the safety, right? So that is one of the first reasons why I would have a multi-account management. Another reason is to be compliant, right? Now there are a lot of regulations, there are a lot of compliance when it comes to different projects, right? One of the projects might have different compliances from another project, right? So I need to manage all of that, so it cannot all be in one account, right? It would not be possible for all the compliances to be managed in a particular account. So you need to have multiple accounts with built-in guardrails, so all of these best practices are maintained, right? Third thing is cost, right? So let's say I want to manage cost for different projects, right? How do I manage cost for different projects? I need to have different tags for different projects, different mechanisms so that I can manage cost. So with multi-account strategy, it becomes easier for me to manage the cost, because I'm sure, I know that this account has to have this particular $10, $15, $50 limit, right? So I can ensure that limit stays that, because it is a separate account itself, right? Fourth is scalability, right? So it is very easy if you have multiple accounts to scale, right? So in a way, I can create more accounts, I can create more resources, because it is easier for me to manage them, right? If it is multi-account, right? And then it also simplifies operations, right? If you are using multiple accounts, it is easy to manage access as well as security, because both of these things are in one place if you have a multi-account strategy, right? So we'll discuss how it is become easier for you, right? So why is a multi-account strategy essential, right? So for for organizations to begin with, a simple AWS account is also enough, right? You don't need to go to a multi-account strategy. But it comes a time when you actually are using a single account, but it doesn't help you, right? So you'll start facing issues like security, issues like cost, issues like scaling, right? So all of these issues will start facing, right? Maybe it is something like, how do I manage multiple users within a single account, right? Or how do I manage security with respect to different workloads in a single account, right? So you'll start facing these issues when it comes to a single AWS account. And that is when it is important for you to move to a multi-account strategy, right? So in this session, as discussed, we'll discuss on how do you organize and manage multiple accounts without any problems, right? Then we'll also discuss simple ways to control who can do what in your AWS account. So because it is very important to understand that there are a lot of users when it comes to AWS accounts. So all of these users can do a lot of things. We have to control those also. So we have to control who can do what, as well as we have to keep things secure as well, right? So we cannot give all the access to all the users for all the AWS accounts, right? And also we'll also see practical tips to keep things running smoothly and also avoid common mistakes, right? So I have some things that I have tried. I have some things that I know for sure will work because of the things that I have done, right, within this control tower. So I'll also share those as well. Okay, so foundations of AWS control tower and landing zone. So the first thing is, what are AWS organizations, right? So think of AWS organization as a way for you, as it's a tool for you to manage your AWS accounts, right? Multiple AWS accounts that you have, you can manage with something called AWS organizations. Now within the AWS organization, there are two things, right? There's a organization units, right? So this organization units is nothing but multiple accounts clubbed into an organization unit or a OU, right? So multiple AWS accounts are part of an organization unit, and you have a practice called foundational organization units and additional organization units. So consider foundational organization units as mandatory or compulsory to have, right? Whereas additional organization units as something that is needed based on your demand, workload, or based on your organization, right? So there are these two types of organization units, right? Now within foundational organization unit, you have two things. You have a security as well as you have an infrastructure, right? So within this security, you will have things like audit, things like maybe logging, right? Maybe security, right? So all of these are part of, all of these AWS accounts reside within your security organization unit, whereas there are different accounts that reside within your infrastructure organization unit as well, right? So yeah, organizations are multiple AWS accounts. Within them, the organization unit, they contain multiple accounts, and we have two divisions, foundational as well as additional organization unit, right? Cool. So the next thing is, so we have understood an AWS organization and the OUs within that account or organization. Now the next part is control tower, right? So think of, so I'll give you a simple analogy, right? So think of an example where you are maybe a shop owner and you want to create a franchise, right? So for you to create a franchise, for you to share to all of your different shops in different locations, you have to create what is called a framework or a set of best practices, SOP, right? So that you share with your shops, and all of these shops follow the same SOP so that you become successful with your basically running your business, right? Now think of control tower as doing the same. So control tower basically provides you a ready-to-go framework for managing multiple AWS accounts, right? So it sets up everything for you. So it sets up security, it sets up users, it sets up compliance. So you don't have to build everything from scratch. Now consider an example. If I were to go and build an AWS account without control tower, I would have to first create an AWS account with all of the things, then like users, groups, roles, right? I'll also have to create best practices when it comes to security. I also have to limit certain users, right? All of these things have to be done by me, right? And consider using control tower, right? So it's just like a plug and play into your AWS environment. You just have to give it an account and details, and it will follow the best practices for creating that account for you, right? So yeah, that's an example for you, right, of how a control tower works, right? Now there are 4 different pillars when it comes to control tower, right? So one of the first things is landing zone, right? So now what is a landing zone? So landing zone is a terminology within the control tower. So landing zone has something called secure and scalable environment for your AWS accounts. So it creates, so when you create a landing zone within the control tower, you're creating a secure and scalable AWS accounts. So it's we'll see in the demo how it looks, right? So what are the security best practices we are creating? What are the different AWS accounts we are creating? We'll see that in demo. But essentially, what a landing zone approach does, it creates or it sets up your organization for all the best practices and all the security and scalability in place, right? So that's the first pillar of an AWS control tower. That's a landing zone, right? So you create an environment where you have a secure and a scalable environment for your AWS accounts. The second thing to look into is guardrails, right? So how do I ensure that my AWS account that I created has all the best practices or security covered, right? So that for that we use guardrails, right? Now for guardrails, there's a service called Security Hub. I'll just share with you how Security Hub works. But essentially, when you create a control tower, you're basically creating so Security Hub is integrated with Control Tower. So whenever you create multiple AWS accounts with Control Tower, you also have security inbuilt with Security Hub, right? So third thing is centralized management, right? So for centralized management, so right now if you have multiple AWS accounts and you might be using IAM users for that, right? So it is very hectic to use IAM users because you have to switch roles, you have to go to different accounts, and the same user has to be in different accounts, right? So it's very hectic to manage that. So there's a service called IAM Identity Center, or people refer to it as SSO. It is basically a centralized location for you to manage your AWS users across multiple accounts, right? So that's again a very important and a very good service for centralized management, along with CloudTrail. CloudTrail is for ensuring any audit within your AWS accounts. So that's for centralized management. And the final thing is automated account creation, right? So the approach that I'm sharing, which is like a control tower / landing zone kind of an approach, is basically like a manual approach. You have to go to the console, you have to click on a few options, and then you get a control tower setup, which is going to create a few accounts for you and a different framework for you, right? Now, what automated account creation does is, so there's a term called account factory. Essentially what it does, it uses Terraform to create a code for you, and that code basically creates a control tower for you. But now, you within the Terraform itself, you could mention that, okay, I need to create 3 accounts. So you just give it account IDs, and then it will create, the Terraform code will create accounts for you. And similarly, you could add more IDs, and it could create more accounts for you. So that's the power of automation with Terraform and account factory. So essentially, consider a scenario where I have maybe more than 50 AWS accounts, and it is very hard for me to go to the console if I were to create 1 or 2 accounts a day, or maybe within a month more accounts, right? So it's hard for me to do that. So essentially, there are different units within my organization, right? So it could be a business unit, it could be a DevOps unit, management unit, right? So those are different units I have. So each unit might request account for some kind of a workload, right? So it's very hard for you as an administrator to manage it manually, right? So in that case, using an AWS account management or AWS account factory is very helpful, right? So that's again a use case where it fits in. So yeah, we looked at control tower and we looked at the 4 pillars within control tower, right? So landing zone, guardrails, centralized management, and automated account creation, right? Now, yeah, so this is the example. It shows you all the 4 pillars, and as well as it shows you continuous management, right? So it's basically happening all the time, right? Now we look at centralized, okay, so we look at centralized identity and security management. I discussed it briefly, but we'll go into the depth of it. So IAM Identity Center is a service for centralized management. So you manage all of your IAM users across multiple accounts with this service, right? And I've mentioned something at the top, which is avoid using IAM users, right? So again, if you are using AWS control tower, or maybe you're managing multiple accounts, then in that case, it definitely or mostly makes sense for you to go with AWS IAM Identity Center. There are a few edge cases where you might want to, or you will have no choice but to use IAM users. Something like, we'll discuss on the edge cases, but for all the users or for all the organizations, it mostly makes sense to use an IAM identity center because you're getting a centralized place where you can have the users log in to any account. So I have a user who wants to log into my development, management, production account. So I have a centralized location where the user can go, and then he can log in to any of that account, right? So that's why it is useful. Second thing why it is useful, it connects you to an external identity provider. So you might be already aware about Microsoft Azure AD or Okta, right? So they are external identity providers. So it's helpful for you to connect these external identity providers with your IAM users using this identity center. So consider a scenario that I have a company which is already using identity providers, right? So it's using Okta, right? So they have, let's say, 10, 20, 50 users in Okta, and now they want to give these users access to AWS accounts. So it is very easy to do that because there's just one connector you have to install to get access, right? So this is just an example of how an IAM identity provider can get access to IAM identity center and via that to an AWS account, right? So here you see the two users, they connect to an identity center via SCIM. They are able to connect to an identity center, and from that identity center, they are able to connect to any AWS account, right? So this is like an approach for identity providers to connect. Now Security Hub, right? So we discussed centralized management with IAM Identity Center. Now Security Hub, right? So for security, like AWS Security Hub is a security posture management service that provides a centralized view for you to check your security status across AWS accounts, right? So it gives you an option to aggregate, organize, prioritize security findings from a different range of tools. So essentially what it does is you have a different services, right? You have AWS Config, you have AWS Inspector that Amay and Toshal were mentioning, as well as you have different other services as well, right? So all of these services are integrated with Security Hub in a way that you're finding all of these securities, vulnerabilities, issues, and they're all being listed into Security Hub, right? So Security Hub basically is like a dashboard for you to find all of the security issues that are happening within the organization. And now, why I'm discussing Security Hub and IAM Identity Center? Because part of the control tower setup is basically creating an IAM Identity Center and is creating a Security Hub for you, right? So both of these things are part of your control tower setup and also part of your AWS best practices. So I'm also discussing that as well, right? So this is kind of a diagram or just a screenshot of how Security Hub works. You see Security Hub has severities, company, product, title, resource, and all those things, right? So here, basically, you're getting a list of all of the findings. They're coming out from different AWS services, or maybe from Security Hub itself, right? So Security Hub itself also is able to give you different severities, right? So yeah, this is kind of an example of how Security Hub works and how the different severities are displayed. So just to show you how Security Hub integrates with Control Tower, so you enable Security Hub on an OU in Control Tower. So whenever you enable Security Hub on an OU, it basically means that the Control Tower will have Security Hub as part of its all best practices, and also it also means that this particular OU will have the dedicated administrator access when it comes to managing the Security Hub. So Amay also talked about it when he said that inspector, he had to basically add that administrator account ID to manage it, right? So we'll also discuss how it works for Security Hub, but consider it as any AWS, you have multiple AWS accounts, but you want to ensure that anyone who's auditing or anyone who's coming to AWS needs to have a single account where he goes. You cannot give him access to all your AWS accounts, right? If he wants to do an audit, right? So you give him access to a separate AWS account called an audit account, and that audit account basically has access to Security Hub, and Security Hub is the dedicated admin for that account, right? So that's how that person or the auditor goes into that Security Hub and looks at the vulnerabilities that you have, right? And that vulnerabilities are basically from different AWS services, right? So this is like an approach, right, that you have to do. Again, it is part of the control tower and the demo I have, so you'll basically know more about it. Okay, so for the demo, I haven't done a video kind of a demo because it will going to be taking forever. A control tower setup takes like 40 minutes to do, right? So once you click on a few buttons, it takes 40 minutes for a control tower to actually provision things for you, right? So that's why I haven't done a demo. I have done a screenshot way. So I have basically done the control tower setup, and I've taken screenshots of whatever setup I've done. So I'll briefly walk you through that. So the first thing that I've done is I went to AWS Control Tower, and I did just setting up a landing zone, right? So for setting up a landing zone, I have to just do a few clicks. I have to create, OK, I want to do a control tower setup. I want to do enable AWS account setup. And what essentially is happening here is your landing zone is being set up, right? Now, what AWS default best practice does is it creates 2 organization units for you, one for your shared accounts and one for accounts that will be provisioned by your users, right? So that is what it is essentially doing. It is creating 2 OUs, sandbox, security, right? Those are the 2 OUs that are being created. Then there are 3 accounts that are being created within these 2 OUs, right? And also it is creating a security and access management configuration. Access management, again, is your centralized identity. I am identity center, and security is, again, your security hub. And it's also creating some preventive controls and some detective controls, right? We'll discuss that. OK, so here you see your landing zone is available. This is all that it has created. I'll move on. So this is the example that you see here is once it has created the landing zone for me, it is giving me an invite on my email, and it's saying that invitation to join an IAM Identity Center, right? So you get an access portal link, and you have to enter your details. You have to enter your username. You have to enter your email, password, things like that. Once you do that, you are in this portal. Now, how many of you are seeing this portal for the first time? So all of you have seen this before? OK. So this is basically like your IAM Identity Center portal, right? It has multiple AWS accounts mentioned here. And for each account, it will give you, once you click on that account, you'll basically be directed to your AWS console, right? So now, the thing that you see here is, we discussed in the previous slides, right? Yeah, here we discussed 2 organization units and 3 AWS accounts, right? So essentially what's happening here is you have these 3 AWS accounts that are created as part of the AWS control tower / landing zone setup, right? So what's happening here is it creates an audit account, it creates a log archive account, and it creates a Cloud Tech for All. So Cloud Tech for All is basically something that I run. It's a root account, so we'll not consider that. But apart from that, the 2 accounts that are created are AWS accounts, right? So audit account is basically the thing that I was mentioning earlier. Your security best practices are in that audit account, right? And the log archive account is basically your CloudTrail, right? So you might have heard the best practice is for your CloudTrail logs to not be stored in the same account. You have to store it in a separate AWS account, right? So the log archive account is for storing your CloudTrail logs as well as your config logs in a separate AWS account in an S3 bucket. So that's happening here. So these are the 2 AWS accounts that are created. And these 2 accounts are in that security organization unit we discussed earlier, right? So I'll show you the diagram which makes it more clear. The different categories, right? So when it comes to creating a control tower with all of the best practices, you're creating, here there's a concept of objectives, right? So now what objective means is, let's say I have, maybe I want to ensure that my AWS account that is created doesn't have S3 bucket public. So S3 bucket shouldn't be public for an AWS account that I create, right? How do I ensure that? So with control objective, there's an option where you can choose that any AWS account that is created with the part of control tower shouldn't have an S3 bucket public. So that is the level of controls and objectives that you can set within the control tower itself, right? Again, this could be something like a detective, this could be something like a preventive, right? So something like a detective means that you are basically saying that if you find something like that, you inform me. It is not that you cannot move forward, right? So those are the things that can happen. So it could either say, OK, you informed me that S3 bucket shouldn't be public, but it is public for this particular account. But you can move forward. In some cases, you cannot move forward with it because this is something that has to be checked. So you have to ensure that S3 bucket is private, then only you can move forward. So right, so those are the detective and preventive things. Yeah, so as an example, you see enable encryption at rest, enable access logging. So all of these things are mandatory options. So you can enforce them or you can not enforce them, right? So those are the different options that you have. Now this is an example of a diagram, right? So you see this diagram, right? You're creating an AWS control tower, and what it essentially does is it uses AWS CloudFormation stack stacks or AWS Service Control AWS Service Catalog for creating AWS organization, right? So now it went to AWS organization, it created a security OU and a sandbox OU, right? So we discussed, right? We saw that it created two OUs for you. And within the security OU, you had audit account and log archive account, right? Now audit account has your security hub, your config, all of those security things in it, right? Whereas your log archive account had your CloudTrail and config logs, right? And then there is also a sandbox OU. Within this sandbox OU, you could create different AWS accounts, right? So consider a scenario where I have a dev, stage, and prod. I would create my dev, stage, and prod AWS accounts within the sandbox OU, right? And my security OU would only have this log and audit account, right? So that's the best practice I was talking about. And then there is IAM Identity Center, and it could then be linked to an identity center directory or an external provider, okay? So yeah, coming to the last topic, which is best practices, right? So best practices when it comes to multi-account management, what are the best practices, right? So one of the first things to ensure is you need to set guardrails with SCPs. So what I mean is we are talking about rules to block things, right? So we are talking about we shouldn't have S3 buckets public, right? So one of the ways is you define that in that objective itself within the control tower. But one of the other ways is also for you to basically put it as an SCP, right? So SCP is a service control policy. It is attached at an organization level. You could also attach at an OU level, or you could also attach it at AWS account level. So now what you can do is you can attach an SCP policy on your sandbox OU that I was discussing, right? So within all of your AWS accounts, dev, stage, and prod, it would be, this SCP policy would be attached, right? And this SCP policy would prevent you from creating any S3 bucket which is public, right? So this is again a very important thing to do, right? So it also ensures consistent policies across your AWS accounts, right? Because I have enabled it on an OU, so all the AWS accounts within it will have that policy, right? And then follow least privileges. So we should always follow least privilege when it comes to creating accounts and giving access to users, right? Because you don't want users to have more access than needed. And you also have to ensure that we regularly check that the access is limited, and we clean up unused permissions, okay? The third thing is monitor and audit. So we discussed having a security hub to track the security vulnerabilities findings, and also review. So we have that dashboard. We can see the issues that are there, and then we have to continuously fix those issues, right? The fourth point is simplifying governance. So one of the important things to do is you need to tag resources across your AWS workloads, right? So any resources that you create within AWS, you should tag them. So whenever it comes to managing resources, it becomes easier for someone to understand which resource is created for which product, and it can help with cost, okay? And the last thing is you should always use something like an ISC tool, something like Terraform, something like CloudFormation for consistency, right? So whenever it comes to having things created manually, it is always good to not do it and use an ISC tool so that it becomes a best practice when it comes to setting it up for multiple accounts, right? Okay, so that was all I had. This is a few resources that you can use to take a look. So, introduction to Control Tower. This is a guide that AWS has published. Then there's best practices for AWS organizations, and also there's landing zone accelerator on AWS. This is like a Terraform thing that I was mentioning about, right? So please scan this and go over the resources that are shared, right? It's extremely helpful to get started. Any questions? Anyone has any questions to ask?
Yeah, hi. I just have a few questions, right? Like, let's say we are on a control tower, and imagine I want to take out an account and make it standalone. What are the best practices that we should think about at that point in time?
So you have an account that you want to put in a control tower, or you want to
take it out of a control tower?
Okay, you want to take an account out of a control tower. So what are the best practices? So first is then understanding why you want to take an account out of a control tower.
Yeah, it is just on a on a change in an organization or anything like that. Let's take a hypothetical situation, right?
Okay, I'll explain a scenario of what best practices to do if you take an account out of organization. But my recommendation would be keep the account in the control tower, but put it in a separate OU, right? So any organization change, anything that you want to change, put the account in an OU, and keep the OU isolated, right? So that way you are having that managerial things also taken care of, as well as you are also not disturbing the control tower setup. Now, to answer your question, where if I move an AWS account out of a control tower setup, what are the best practices I need to ensure? One is whatever you're doing with control tower, so you are doing it with IAM Identity Center, you're doing with Security Hub, that also needs to be there for that account, because you need to have it consistent across accounts, right? So that's one. And two would be, also ensure all of the best practices I was listing, like the tagging, the IAC, all of those things need to be followed. But the basics are whatever you're doing with control tower, have them replicated manually as well for your separate account, right?
All right. Thank you.
I would like to invite Tinsy to hand over a speaker gift.